Hello and welcome to another Every Tuesday tutorial. In this week's tutorial we are going to be creating a handmade, hand-lettered Father's Day card together. So this is the exact outcome of what we're going to make together in this video. And we have a few different supplies that I'm going to walk you through right now, and then we're just going to hop right in and get started. So the first thing you need is some watercolor paper. I use Canson cold press watercolor paper. It works really well and it's super affordable, so that's what I would recommend. I did put together a greeting card template, so if you have an A4 size or an 8.5 by 11 size sheet of watercolor paper, I just cut this down to 8.5 by 11 and then I ran it through my printer, this template, which I'll leave a link on screen and in the video description of where you can download that and pick it up. It's totally free. That way you can just run it through your printer and then you've got this nice template, so you have an exact 4-inch wide by 6-inch tall greeting card, and that fits in any A4 size envelope. So definitely be sure to hit the link in the video description to go and pick that up. Okay, so obviously we need to cut this template out of this paper, so I use a utility knife. You can use an X-Acto knife, whatever you prefer right there. I just feel like I have more control over a sturdier like box cutter right here. You'll need a ruler so you can cut along that template with your straight line, so pretty basic stuff right here. I've got a cup full of water for our watercolor portion. I'm using Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus concentrated watercolors for this, so you can see the colors a little more vibrant on screen, but if you prefer to use a pan set or tube watercolors, that's totally fine. Whatever watercolors you prefer, there's nothing that's going to get you greater results by using concentrated watercolors. They're just a little more vibrant on screen for a tutorial. So I've got a number 4 round Winsor & Newton Cotman paintbrush, watercolor brush for this. I love this brush. It's one of my favorite sizes, so that's what I'm going to be using for everything right here for this ribbon. I just have a basic paint palette. I'm using a Tombow Fudenosuke twin tip marker. It's got gray on one end and it's got black on the other end, which you'll see we can do the lettering in black, and then the gray end allows us to add some extra depth to our letters. I actually shade right over my watercolor on here. It works really well, so I've been doing that for a while. So that would be my recommendation for your marker. And then I just have a gold jelly roll gel pen right here, just for some of the finer details. If you want to put some embellishments around your ribbon or around your letters, that's what I use. I've got an eyedropper just to dilute my concentrated watercolors. It's totally optional, but just letting you know everything I'm using. And then I've just got a regular paper towel right here for the watercolor. So all that said, this is a cutting mat, so I can cut and not harm this desk of mine. So I'm just going to hop right in and get started. I'm going to clear all this stuff away, and then we're going to cut out the template. I'm going to show you how I cut the template out, and then we will start painting. Okay, so I've got my template right here, and I've got my ruler, and I've got my utility knife right here. So the first thing I do is I score my center line right here. In the past, I've used a pen that doesn't work to do scoring, and I also use the back of my utility knife blade, or you can use the back of an X-Acto blade, and that actually gives you a pretty nice score as well. So I'm just going to line up right here these two lines, and then just use the back of the blade right here, and you're just going to score all the way down. And now we've got a nice score line right here. And then when you're cutting your trim marks, the most important part when you're trimming trim marks is, when you're cutting trim marks, is you don't want to go all the way from one end of the paper to the other end. You need to kind of cut this out in a window way so you don't lose these lines for when you line these ones up. So I'm just going to cut between these two lines. And that's it. So you can see I don't go past the edges. And then same thing on this side. Okay, so it should just pop right out nice and easy. And now with our score mark, you can just fold right along that line. And now we've got a nice folded card, the exact size that we need it to be. So I'm gonna bring everything back and we're gonna get started on that ribbon. Okay, so if we reference the example right here, I'm just gonna walk you through some basic steps to create a ribbon. If you've never created a ribbon like this before, it can look kind of complicated, but we can actually break it down in some very simple steps to make ribbons like this not intimidating at all. So I'm just gonna use, I've got some extra paper down here just in case any splashes of watercolor don't damage my cutting mat, and also so you can see everything better. So I'm just going to show you how I draw ribbons like this. So I'm just going to use this paper right here. I've got a pencil too right here. So the first thing I do is I draw out the areas where my lettering is going to be. So I've got 3 areas right here. So the first thing I do is I draw 2 vertical lines as similar length as possible, and as parallel as possible. And then when you go to connect them, you want to dip first and then peak last. So I'm going to dip and then peak, and I'm going to connect just like that. And then you can draw your other segments above and below. If you're doing 3, if you do 2, that's fine too. So dip and then peak. Okay, so that's step number 1. Step number 2 is a little more complex. This is where we put in our loops and our angles right here. So the first thing I do is I just do angles, and angles connect your lettering segments together. So I'm just going to go from this corner up. Let me move this out of the way. I'm going to go from this bottom corner of the top one and then connect it down. And it's okay wherever it hits down here, that's fine. Just keep your angle consistent and your width consistent. So I'm trying to match a similar width between this width and this width. That way it seems realistic. And then I'm going to do the same thing down here. So I'm going to grab this corner, bring it down, and then just approximate the width between this and this. I know this one's skinnier than this one, so I'm going to try and make it as believable as possible, just figuring out some middle ground as far as width goes. And then what you're going to do is, you can see where this line comes. You're going to pretend that it's going all the way through this part, and then you're just going to do a semicircle on the bottom of this side. So same thing down here. And then up here, we're going to kind of follow this angle up and do it on the top side here, a semicircle. Same thing here. Okay. So we're looking pretty good so far, and now we also need to finish this off with our top part of a ribbon up here and our bottom part down here. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did before, only I'm going to come down and finish this off right here, and then I can just follow this line up, and then this bottom part is done. And then the same thing over here. I'm going to kind of draw this up here, and then where it comes down, I'm going to connect this line here. Okay, so that's how simple the ribbon is, and then everything else from this point, we're going to do all the shading and coloring and embellishments afterwards. So I'm going to grab my new card right here, and we're going to do the same thing, only I kind of freehand it now with the paintbrush. You could draw it lightly in pencil on here first. I just don't like any pencil marks ever showing up if I can avoid it, so I'm just going to freehand it here, but definitely don't feel like you can't draw it lightly in pencil first if you want a few practice tries. And you're also going to try and keep this as centered as possible when you're drawing your ribbon out. So it takes a little bit of visual planning as you go. So I am doing my ribbons as like a lighter ribbon up here. This is more of a wash, and then I've got my darker color right here, and I'm kind of building up the shading of my underneath parts. So what I'm using is, this is phthalo blue, and then this one is ultramarine. So I'm going to start with the phthalo blue first. And I actually, since I just want a wash of this, I'm going to put 1 drop in here, and 1 drop is actually even too much. So I'm going to dilute it down afterwards. So 1 drop in here. And then my personal practice, what I do is I grab an eyedropper full of water, and I actually put it over here. That way I have more control, because I want more water than I want watercolor in it. So what I'll do is take my brush and just grab a little bit of this drop, since 1 drop was too much for me. Just grab a little bit of that on the tip of my brush, and then bring it into this little pool of water right here. So I just want a little bit, so I've got a wash going on right here. And then I can do a test over here that seems a little light before I bring it to the actual watercolor paper. That seems pretty good. We'll go with this and see how it looks. So I'm going to come back here, and now I'm going to approximate where my center is, and then figure out where my center is lengthwise too. And then my middle ribbon is going to be my largest one, because it's going to say Fathers on it. Okay, so we've got our first lettering area of our ribbon all set. So now we're going to do the top and the bottom in the same exact way. Okay, so once you have all of your lettering areas complete for your ribbon, now we're going to go in and create our background area. So I'm using the darker blue for this, so I'm going to put a drop of this in here. And this one I don't need to dilute as much. So I got one drop here, but I'm going to put in quite a bit of water in here because I don't want it too dark. But this is going to create nice contrast between my lighter blue, so the lettering will stand out even more. So we can try this out. It's looking good. Okay, so I'm going to do the exact same thing that we did right here with doing our angles first and then putting in our loops. Okay, so now that we have our ribbon, I tend to go back in and just put a little extra dark blue on my underside loops. Looks like I missed my top loops right here, so I'm going to put those in right now. Felt like something might have been a little bit off. Okay, so we have got a good looking ribbon right there. So the next thing is putting in your lettering. So this is where you want to make sure everything is totally dry before you move forward. And I grab my Tombow Fudenosuke, the twin tip, and I'm using the black tip for the lettering. And then I'm going to go in and embellish it with the gray area. If you want to use just watercolor or some other utensil, definitely feel free to do that. I just think that this shows up really well and I want it to be very readable since it's a greeting card. So I'm gonna put in my lettering right now. Okay, so now what I do is I come in with my gray tip and I'm just going to put a shadow on my letter. So I'm going all on the right side of my strokes. So this one will come down and then the bottom part as well. Okay, so just to add a little more focus to the word fathers right here, I'm going to go in and right wherever I had the gray, I'm just going to do a finer stroke, but I'm going to have it disconnected. So right here we've got it connected where the gray and the black are touching. So I'm just going to do a fine line gray, but not connected. Okay, and then one final thing that I'm going to do, I just felt like fathers needed a little bit more focus, so I'm placing some gold with my Jelly Roll gel pen right between where the gray hits the black from our first embellishment. Okay, so now it's got a little bit of shine once it's all dry. Okay, so the last thing is I put, actually I'm going to do the shading on the ribbon first so I don't smudge this. This stays wet for a solid amount of time and it's really easy to smudge, so I like saving this for last most times. So I'm going to come back to my Tombow Fudenosuke twin tip and I'm going to go to my gray once again, and I like just putting a little extra shading on my ribbon, which really makes everything feel finished and more complete, and it really makes these front ribbon portions really pop forward. So all I'm going to do is I turn it so I'm brushing towards myself, so I'm kind of doing this kind of motion so it seems like a fade as I'm drawing. So the first thing I do is I draw a line where the ribbons meet right here, and then I use that as a guide, so I've got it kind of at an angle and it's pressing forward, so kind of like that. and it gives it a nice fade effect, which is really nice for shading. And then for the bottom portions, I just color these ones all the way in. So I'll do all of the segments that are kind of like this, and then I'll turn it around. So I'm always using this motion of moving towards myself. Okay, so I've got these bottom parts, but now I'm going to do the top parts. So I'm going to draw this line once again, but now I'm going to turn the paper, so now I'm still keeping that same action of moving. Okay, so one other thing that I want to do before I go to my gel pen is you can see I've got kind of a faux shadow right here that I used with the wash that I really like. So I'm going to put that in here right now. So I'm just going to return to my wash, just grab a little bit of paint on my brush, and then just put in these fine details. Okay, so the last thing I do is just do these lines all the way around. So I'm pretending that I've got a center point right in the middle of my middle lettering area on this ribbon, and I'm just going to kind of emanate all of my lines from that single invisible point right here. And I kind of vary them in length as I go around. And then from here, I'll just drop in some dots above and in the middle and below. So from here, I would just wait for this to dry, put in your message on the inside, and then you can just fold this up and drop it into any A4 size envelope. So that is how to create a handmade watercolor ribbon Father's Day card, all from scratch and by hand. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe. I release a new design tutorial every single Tuesday. And don't forget to head on over to my blog, every-tuesday.com, for even more design tutorials and a bunch of design freebies. And once again, hit the link in the video description for that free template so you can print it out onto your watercolor paper and cut it out. And plus all the supplies that I used in this video are also listed, so you'll have direct access to those as well. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you next week.